Okay, now we're jumping up to chapter 9, joints. And a joint is just where one bone meets another. And we usually think of joints as being really movable and allow the movement between two pieces of bone, but not all of them are movable. And there's going to be a couple different ways we're going to categorize joints. One of which is what is the material between the two bones and how movable are they. And there is a trade-off between the stability of a joint, that how stable it is, how least likely it is to dislocate, and the degree of movement. The more degree of movement, the more movement allowed, the less stable the joint is. And so we're going to look at three broad types, actually plus a fourth, talking about the stuff between the two bones. And fibers would be fiber, which is more dense, irregular kinds of tissue, cartilage between the joints, and synovial is an actual synovial fluid. And those are the joints we were most familiar with. And the fourth is actually bone between the two bone joints. And it doesn't even look like a joint. And that's one that, for some reason, was left out of the book. But I've got to add it. Here's slide 2, just looking at the the categorization of the three general types of joints, depending upon what is the material, what is the tissue between the two bones. Fibrous joints up here, um, they're immovable joints, and we're going to see a couple of examples later on when we'll look at these. And then there's cartilaginous joints, which are usually slightly movable joints, and that's cartilage between them. And then here, the most common type of joint, synovial joints, and they are freely movable joints. And those are the joints we're most familiar with. And here is the range of stability to freedom of movement. As I mentioned, we're going to learn the shoulder is the least stable joint, and the joints between the flat bones of your skull are one of the most stable of all the joints. Slide 3 is just another way of classifying joints now based on how much movement is allowed. And we're going to get into some really strange terminology here. A lot of them starting with SYN, a lot of very similar sounding names of joints. And there's just no way around it. You just got to go over them and learn them. There's just no short way around it. We got to learn a lot of kind of some strange terminology, like synarthrosis for an immovable joint, amphiarthrosis for a slightly movable joint, and diarthrosis for a freely movable joint. And so all joints can be classified in those two different ways. What is the material between the two pieces of the two bones, and how much movement is allowed? So here's some specific examples on slide 4 of particular joints and how you classify them. The first one is a bony joint called a stenosis. This is one that's not actually in the book, and it's the mandible. Your mandible, your lower jaw, seems like it's one bone, but actually it's two, and the two bones are so fused that you can't even see a joint between them. It's bone between the two parts of bone. Your frontal bone in your forehead is the same way. Then, and of course, they're completely immovable joints. Fibrous joints. Dense irregular connective tissue, I'm pretty sure, is the fiber between, so it's dense fiber between the two bones. And the sutures in your cranium is an example of one. A gomphosis, which is teeth. Teeth in your mandible and in your maxilla bone are actually joints, immovable ones called gomphoses. And then, and those are synarthritic joints, completely immovable. And then there's something called a syndesmosis, which is between your distal tibia and fibula and radial and ulna, that allows a little bit of movement between those. And so that's a fibrous joint, but in this case, it's an ampiarthrotic joint also, because it allows a little bit of movement. Slide 5 is just a drawings of three types of fibrous joints. gomphosis right here, which is also a synanthrosis, a suture in the flat bones of the skull, which is also a synanthrosis, and a syndesmosis between the ulnar and radial, which is fibrous connective tissue also, but is an amphiarthrosis, allows a little bit of movement. Okay, on to joint 6. Now we get into the cartilaginous joints. And these are usually amphiarthrosis joints also, like a synchondrosis, bound by hyaline cartilage. Epiphyseal plate is an example of this when you're young, and this actually be a synanthrosis. But also, I think between your clavicle and your sternum is also a synchondrosis, and it is slightly movable. Oh. And then there's a symphysis, and there's only uh, two, two of these. The pubic symphysis between two pubic bones, and this is fibrocartilages between them, not hyaline cartilage. And your intervertebral discs is also called is also a symphysis, and that is a amphiarthrotic joint. And then finally, synovial or diarthrosis, most movable, and has a joint fluid-filled joint cavity between the bones, and it's lined with cartilage. And regular joints we usually think about knee, hip, shoulder, elbow are all those type of joints. And they're most likely to cause problems because remember, the more freely movable you are, the more likely they are to dislocate, the less stable they are. Okay, then slide 7. This will be the last slide on this particular video. Synchondrosis to the left contains hyaline cartilage, epiphyseal plate, which really doesn't move. And then the costochondral joints, I forgot, it was between the ribs and the sternum, are also synchondroses. I think clavicle and sternum is also. But anyway, that's synchondrosis. And then symphysis between the two pubic bones in the front of your groin, the pubic symphysis, and between these vertebrae is a symphysis. And this is fibrocartilage.